A few weeks ago, we started a series called The 4 Keys to Mental Health. It's based on a book, and Tammy and I are giving a free copy to every family. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet, go to the welcome desk. And in that book, we talk about mental health, and we've talked about how if you have a body, you have physical health. And if you have a brain, for some of us that's kind of questionable, but if you have a brain, you have mental health, right? And the question is not so much if you have mental health, the question is what is the current state of your mental health? I know in my own life, there's been times when my mental health is really good. There have been also times when it's been very low. And back in 2002, I went through probably the lowest state that I can think of. And I began to search for answers. I interviewed people, I filled notebooks of information, I read the Bible, I prayed. And as I was collecting all of this information, little did I know that one day I'd write a book about it, but as I was collecting this information, one day I realized that everything that I had been learning fit into 4 buckets. And it's found in Luke 2:52. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. And notice that Jesus grew in 4 areas. He grew mentally, or wisdom. He grew physically, or stature. Spiritually, favor with God. Then relationally, favor with man. And we call those the 4 keys. But here was my breakthrough moment. And it's so basic and so simple, but it was very profound. It's when I understood that if I wanted to be as mentally healthy as I could be, and by the way, one of the things that I've learned is I'm taking care of me for you. In other words, I'm no good as your pastor if I'm not doing well mentally or spirit. Does that make sense? So sometimes we can think, oh, that's kind of being selfish. No, I call it stewardship of self so that you can better serve and help others. But my big breakthrough was when I realized that if I wanted to be as mentally healthy as I could be, I need to focus on all 4 of those areas, not just 1 or 2. So far in this series, we've talked about the spiritual and the mental, and today we're going to talk about the physical key. But before we do, let me ask you a question. You ever thought, well, if I was just a better Christian, I wouldn't wrestle with mental health challenges? If I was more godly, I wouldn't struggle with anxiety or depression. Well, since I'm wrestling with these things, it means I'm a bad Christian. I've let God down. You ever had thoughts like that? I know I did in my early days. And if that is you, I want you to think about the prophet Elijah. Now, think about his spiritual resume. Wow. Say wow. I haven't even shared it with you yet, but it's amazing. He was at the transfiguration with Jesus. He prayed and rain ceased for more than 3 years. Now, could you imagine that? You pray and it doesn't snow for 3 years or something like that. Some of you are like, yay. He brought a widow's son back to life. God did through him. He parted the Red Jordan River. He was miraculously fed by ravens. Wow. Talk about a spiritual resume like that. It's like, wow, the great prophet Elijah. But what we're going to learn today is that he went from heroic faith to suicidal depression in 1 chapter. The great prophet Elijah. So his story doesn't really back up that thought that if I was a man of God, I wouldn't struggle with these things. And that is one of the biggest things that was helpful to me in my journey, is to realize that many great men and women of God in the Bible and in church history have wrestled with these things. And our goal as a church is to be able to talk about these things, right? Mr. Rogers used to say, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And instead of keeping this stuff, we don't talk about it, let's talk about it. That we don't want to be a church that stigmatizes certain kinds of brokenness over others. We're all broken just in different ways. That's why we need the grace and help of Jesus. So around 860 BC, the prophet Elijah is having a showdown with 450 prophets of Baal. This is kind of like the OK Corral gunfight of the Bible. And both sides have an altar and they're praying to their God, and the other people these prophets are praying to Baal, but nothing happens. And then Elijah prays to Jehovah, and fire comes and consumes the altar, and the people recognize that the Lord is the true God and the false prophets were defeated. Now think about that. Could you imagine being Elijah? Talk about being on a spiritual mountain. Talk about being, a Super Bowl victory. I mean, wow, that is what he just experienced. But notice what happens in the next chapter. Verse 3. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. While he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. The great prophet Elijah. He was so depressed, he wanted to die. Now, if you're out there and you want to die, specifically if you have a plan in place, I just want to encourage you to talk to someone. It's okay not to be okay. Just don't be not okay alone. Talk to someone. Don't give up. It's always too soon to quit. Get help. Victory comes from vulnerability. But here is the great prophet Elijah, who sinks in suicidal despair. And I just want to say that if you're down, if you're discouraged, first of all, I've been there. But secondly, I want to say you're not alone. Many great people in the Bible. We talked about David a while ago. We're talking about Elijah. I could give other examples, people throughout history that have gone through these difficulties. You are not alone. So how does Elijah recover? It's interesting because what we're going to share is that it's kind of like he's told to do things like eat, sleep, drink water, and get exercise. And I remember when I first read that, I was like, man, talk about unspiritual advice, right? I mean, I would have thought read the Bible, pray. Now, those things are the most important things. Don't get me wrong. But I just remember the first time that I read this story thinking, this doesn't seem like very spiritual advice. But one of the things that I've learned is that God can bring healing to our souls through care for our bodies. That God can bring healing to our souls through care for our bodies. And I want to just share with you some of the things that I learned from the story of Elijah. Number one is the spirituality of sleep. 1 Kings 19:5 says, "Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep." Do you see how rest and sleep was a part of his recovery? Do you value sleep? Someone told me once that sleep is sacred. And some people kind of have the attitude of, well, rest is for the weak. I've had people tell me, I'll get all the sleep I need when I'm dead. Some of you are like, I value sleep. That's why I come to church every Sunday. I get my best sleep during your sermons. Well, I'm glad I can help. But think for a moment about the benefits of good sleep. It regulates the release of essential hormones. It slows the aging process. How many of you want to slow the aging process down, right? It boosts your immune system. It improves brain function. It reduces cortisol levels. Now, one of my discoveries was when I understood that there's a connection between the fruit of the Spirit and sleep. Now, as Christians, the goal is to display the fruit of the Spirit, right? The fruit of the Spirit describe Jesus, and our goal is to be like Jesus. What was Jesus like? The fruit of the Spirit. So what is the fruit of the Spirit? Well, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the goal of the Christian, is to be loving and joyful and peaceful, right? Well, have you ever thought about the connection between sleep and the fruit of the Spirit? One person said, I once struggled with the truth that patience is the fruit of the Holy Spirit because I knew from experience that it's also a fruit of a good night's rest. In other words, I was crabbier on little rest and less so on good rest. How many of you can relate to that? You're like, I'm sitting next to Crabby right now. What brought light to this perplexity is that, listen to this, one of the ways the Spirit produces his fruits in our lives is by humbling us enough to believe that we're not God and that God can run the world without our staying up too late and getting up too early. I know that was just a big wow. Do you prioritize sleep? Do you prioritize getting enough rest? In the book, I go over just some very basic ways to get better sleep. But what we're learning today is that God can bring healing to our souls through care for our bodies. So the next thing is the nature of nutrition. In 1 Kings 19:5, it says, all at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. Get up and eat. He recognizes the value of nutrition. Have you come to realize that the food you eat can affect the mood you feel? That food can affect mood? So I remember it as clear as yesterday. I was meeting a mentor of mine in Cannon Falls. He's from the cities. I'm from down here. It's halfway. And we're sitting there, and the waitress comes up, and I said, I'll have a hamburger and fries. It was his turn. He said, I'll have a salad. And I'm like, a salad? Let's say I've eaten this guy before, and it would have been the last thing on his mind. So the waitress got his order, and I'm like, are you on a diet? And he got really serious. He's like, Steve, I've been neglecting myself for many years, and it's catching up with me. And he said something I've never forgot. He said, I've developed a new attitude towards food, and that is every bite is an act of worship. Now, I want to clarify how to interpret that, because one guy told me after the first service, well, I'm worshiping a lot then. It's not what I meant. I meant so you got to make it clear, some of us. But think about it. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. And today we're not talking about perfection. That's something that is kind of focused in our culture, is having the perfect look and all that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being good stewards of what the Lord has given us. And one of the things the Lord has given us is our physical being. Now, how do you do that? Number one, eat God's food, not man's food. In the Daniel plan, they say our philosophy is that if it was grown on a plant, eat it. If it was made in a plant, leave it on the shelf. You say, are we getting rid of the donuts? I believe in moderation, so I think it's okay to eat donuts at church. Some of you got to cut it down to one, though. I've talked to people, and they have like 5 donuts a Sunday. I'm serious. In fact, I'm looking at one of them right now. When they were a kid, used to do that. I think you can have a donut once a week. It's those of us who are having donuts every day. That's kind of the thing that I would be against. But it says, eat God-formed food, not human processed food. Eat food that is whole, fresh, and unprocessed. Now, here's something that I think is important, is if we go to the deeper why, and that is the question of how do we view food? How many of you have ever heard of comfort food? You ever heard of that concept that you're stressed, you're anxious? So what do? You open the fridge and you get, some sardines or something. Or maybe you eat ice cream, or maybe you have chips, or, and you're looking for comfort from food, right? Can any of you relate to this, right? I think we all know what I'm talking about. So what if we looked at food for nutritional reasons and looked to the Lord for spiritual and emotional reasons? What if, before we ate that, we asked, why am I eating this? Am I eating this to satisfy the longings of my heart that only God can do? Or am I eating this for fuel? Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. What if we looked at bread to fill our nutritional needs and looked to the bread of life to fill our spiritual and emotional needs? Is it possible that some of us have an unhealthy relationship with food? In the book, The Maker's Diet, the author writes, in our era, we've allowed food to become our idol. Too many people, admittedly, live to eat. Now, before I go further, I just want to say this is not about shame. This is not about condemnation. This is about redemption. And yesterday ended last night But going forward, what if we said, Holy Spirit, you're my comforter. Food, you're my fuel, right? My nutritional fuel. But here's the question. What if we saw every bite as an act of worship? So we're talking about the physical key, and the physical key says that taking care of our bodies can energize our soul. And the next thing I see in this story is the habit of hydration. Now look at it, verse 6. It says, he looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and jar of water. He ate and drank and then laid down again. Do you see how water was a part of the healing process? And the question is do you understand the value of water? Do you understand the value of being hydrated? You know, one of the things that I thank God for every day is clean water. We take it for granted in our culture, but just the importance of staying hydrated. I remember in my teenage years, my first job was that of a bee farmer. And it was quite a physical job because you'd be out in nature and these bees would sting you. And one day it was like really hot. And as a teenager, I'd forgot to drink and I passed out. I forgot to drink water. And I remember kind of waking up in this farmhouse or something, and they had me drink a lot of water and they had a fan on me. And I felt as dry as the Sahara Desert. And that's when I began to understand the importance of hydration. And do you understand the value of hydration? Now, it's interesting. I've had a couple of people talk to me this week about the book, and both of them mentioned this chapter, that it really stood out to them. And I think one of the reasons is because it's, first of all, doable, but secondly, it's so basic. But do you understand the importance of hydration when it comes to your overall health and well-being? Dr. Don Colbert said, water is the single most important nutrition for our bodies. It is involved in every function of our bodies. You can live 5 to 7 weeks without food, but the average adult can last no more than 5 days without water. You know, one of the things that I went through in my early 20s when I first really became on fire for God is I thought of talking about this stuff, thinking about this kind of stuff was unspiritual. I could be doing more important things like reading the Bible and prayer. Now, those are the most important things, yes. But here's what I've learned. The more I make these things a priority, the more energy and life I have to pray and read the Bible. Does that make sense? So, do you understand the importance of water? Now, what about water and hydration when it comes to your brain? Listen to this. Studies show that you need to be only 1% dehydrated to experience a 5% decrease in cognitive function. Now, how many of you want your brain to work better? I know I do. I mean, I need all the help I can get. And if being hydrated can help with that. A 2% decrease in brain hydration can result in short-term memory loss, trouble with math computations. Prolonged dehydration can cause brain cells to shrink in size and mass, a condition common in many elderly who have been dehydrated for years. So, do you understand the value of staying hydrated? So today we're talking about the physical key, and we're talking about the fact that even a great prophet like Elijah went through a season of despair. We're studying his recovery process, and we're learning that it seemed like there was what I would call just basic stuff that was included in his story. And the final thing that I want to talk about is the effects of exercise. Now look at verse 7. It says, so he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by the food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights. He would not have gotten an Uber, right? He wouldn't have gotten into his car. He probably would have walked this until he reached Oreb, the mountain of God. Now, scholars say that this would have been a journey of about 260 to 360 miles. And most people in this ancient culture could walk about 10 to 20 miles a day. But since he was probably going through a desert, It's more like he would have walked 5 to 9 miles a day. Now, walking 5 to 9 miles a day, that's pretty good exercise. Would you agree with that? Right? So it's like exercise was a part of his recovery. Now, let me say something really clear. Some of you are like, I exercise all the time. I practice something called power sitting. That is not what I'm talking about. Others of you are like, well, I exercise all the time. I jump to conclusions. Again, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that motion can affect emotion. Moving your body can energize your brain. Motion, in fact, one of the things that I did was I thought about how many times it talked about like Jesus going up a mountain or how much he would have walked. And so I think that was stuff they just did back then. We're in more of like a sedentary culture where people sit a lot. And today I want to just have you think about the value of exercise. Now, here are some benefits of practicing daily exercise. It sharpens your brain. Did you know that? That by physically moving your body, it makes your brain stronger? The brain responds like muscles do, growing with use, withering with inactivity. The neurons in the brain connect to one another through leaves on tree-like branches, and exercise can cause those branches to grow and bloom with new buds, thus enhancing brain function at a fundamental level. So what I'm about to share with you is kind of the thing that God used to really help me to become a devoted exerciser. Now, there's things on this list that I struggle with, but exercise is not one of them. And it was actually what I'm about to share with you that for some reason, God used to really help me to understand the value of exercise. So what I'm about to say, again, I'm just in this book, I just share my journey. And what I'm about to share with you is really what God used to help me to get into exercise. I never approach exercise like I feel like doing it, but I know that after I do it, I'm going to feel a lot better. So this is what God used to really help me develop by his glory, and I give him the credit, just the habit of exercise. So there was a school in Chicago called Naperville Central High School, and they incorporated what they called the 0 hour, and that was a time of exercise before school. And when they defined exercise, they weren't talking about you beating this person in a race. It was just getting your heart rate at a certain speed and all of that stuff. But then they discovered the results of that. And here's what they found. Those that participated in the exercise before school saw a 17% improvement in reading and comprehension, compared with a 10.7% improvement among the other literary students who opted to sleep in and take standard physical education. For some reason, God just used that to say, hey, 6% better? Now, if you know me, I need all the help I can get. So I'm like, I'm going to start doing this just because I want to be able to use my brain at the highest function that it can be. Now, here's another thing. There's a spiritual principle that it's in giving that we receive. You know, the Bible says, give and it'll be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. So this is a spiritual principle, that it's in giving that we receive. And I found this true of energy, that when I give energy to exercise, I actually gain energy back. One person said, most of us think we don't have time to exercise. What a distorted paradigm. We don't have time not to. We're talking about 3 to 6 hours a week for a minimum of 30 minutes daily, every other day. That hardly seems an inordinate amount of time, considering the tremendous benefits in terms of the impact on the other 160 to 165 hours of the week. Now, here's another thing. I think it can show gratitude to God. You know, God has given us this physical nature, and I think that when we take care of ourselves, it can be a way of saying, God, thank you. And imagine as you and I were exercising, imagine praying a prayer like this. God, thank you for the ability to walk, run, squat. Thank you for this body you've given me. I want to take care of it so I can serve you longer. And that leads to our next benefit, that in general, You know, one of the things that I've learned is I remember as a kid, all of a sudden the engine was just kind of like all the smoke was coming from it. And I learned the importance of putting oil in your car, right? And that was a big breakthrough. And what I've learned is that in general, some of you will know this because you know about cars and stuff, that if you take better care of the car, it'll last longer in general. Is that accurate? Like if you get oil change every 5 years or so or something like that. But, right? I mean, we know this. And I think in general, I hesitate to say always because we know people who've taken good care of themselves and the Lord calls them sooner. But in general, taking care of yourself could help you to serve the Lord longer. And then finally, it helps cope with depression and anxiety. So yesterday, I kind of found myself just kind of depressed and discouraged. I think I was watching shows on the Super Bowl. And it's like, my bucket list, write a book, and the Vikings go to the Super Bowl. That's all I'm asking. And I think this time of year, it just kind of brings it all back, like another year. All I want before I go to see Jesus is to see the Vikings win the Super Bowl. Is that too much to ask? Right? So, it just brings up this trauma. And I'm literally sitting there kind of down, and I thought, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to take the dogs for a walk. And actually was it like 5 yesterday or something? I mean, it was really warm out. And it was also sunny. And I literally did it as an experiment. I'm like, I'm just going to see how I feel when I got back. And guess what? I felt much better, And there is something about just motion can affect emotion. Well, you say, well, I don't want to join a gym. I don't want to lift weights. What about just walking? Walking connects the right and left hemisphere of your brain, helping your brain get stuck. It releases endorphins, fires up neurotransmitters, provides greater clarity of thought. Walking regularly improves memory. It fights rigidity in your brain and helps long-term brain function and health in a myriad of ways. And you can include walking with prayer walking, but something as simple as walking. Now, here's what we've learned today. Even the great prophet Elijah went through a season of intense depression. And David, we talked about it earlier. And so there's no shame, right? And that was something that really helped me in my journey, is that many great people in the Bible, great people in church history, wrestled with this as well. And I still remember reading this story, and I just thought, gosh, this advice seems so unspiritual. But when you become a Christian, you don't stop becoming... Let me say it this way. When you become a Christian, you don't stop being a human being. Right? And God made us with certain needs. Food, sleep, exercise, those sort of things. This is not about shame. I know there can be shame in this area. That is not my heart. It's not about shame. It's not about condemnation. It's not about yesterday. It's about today and moving forward. And what is one of these habits that God is speaking to you about that this week, maybe it's just focusing on being hydrated. Maybe it's better food choice. Whatever it is, what is one thing the Lord wants you to act upon this week? And then also just try to think about how God approached Elijah. He did not shame him. Oh, shame on you, you bad Christian, you bad. No, he didn't do that. He was actually quite compassionate and gracious. Lord, thank you for the example of Elijah that reminds us that often after great victories, there can be letdowns. After mountains can be valleys. And thank you that you are the God, whether we're in the mountain or the valley. Thank you for just the practicality of the lessons we learn. Lord, I know there are other things in this story, but help us to remember the physical key when it comes to our mental health. And from this day forward, God, I just pray that you'd give us the strength to live an uncommon life by doing these things for your glory. God, it's not about shame, it's about redemption. So thank you, Lord. Well, today is Communion Sunday, and it's the day when we're reminded of what we have in common. See, the word communion actually means sharing in common. And what we share in common today is that just as God met Elijah in his exhaustion, God meets us here through Jesus. And communion reminds us that we don't run on our own strength, but Christ is our sustenance. What about children? Well, the only requirement I see in the Bible of communion is that you have a genuine relationship with Jesus, that you're born again. So parents, if you believe your kids are born again, then they're welcome to join with us. We have some gluten-free wafers. We use juice and not actual wine. And we're going to have a diagram that'll show you how to come and get the elements. What we're going to have you do is come forward, get the elements, go back to your seat, and then we'll partake of them together. And when you're waiting, this is the time to pray. You know, the Bible talks about examine yourself. So this is the time to say, Lord, is there sin in my life? Is there unconfessed sin in my life that I need to confess to him? So just take that moment to do that. Let me pray, and then we're going to start bringing folks up to do this. Father, thank you for the sacrificial love of Jesus. As we take this bread and cup, draw our hearts back to the cross and the love shown there. I ask this in your name. Amen.